Welcome if you're joining online. This is the second of our series in Walking in the Footsteps of Grief at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Lynchburg, Virginia.
I wanted to just recap a little bit
of our disclaimer about
and to
grief and to
reorient us
about where we hope to go with this series and with this discussion. And then I'll introduce tonight's speaker. I'm Nina Salmon, and I was our speaker last week and shared my story and a response to grief that involved writing as an outlet. Tonight you'll hear from our current senior warden, Joyce Bailey, who will share with us her story and the creative outlet of painting that has been a recent creative outlet, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. So I want to just name the fact that one of the things we talk about when we talk about grief is that it is
not a straight line.
Not a straight line. We're not working towards solving our grief. We're not working towards trying to cure our grief. We're just recognizing that grief is. And everyone's grief journey is everyone's own. It's not the same for everyone. And just because I have a story doesn't make my grief story any more or less difficult than your grief story. So we want to just make sure that we're holding up grief as something that is universal, and each person's grief story is each person's grief story. We hope that what we are offering is very a place of vulnerability, but also a universal place of awareness and understanding that we connect with one another through sharing our stories, and we connect through shared experience. So there is, at some level, a shared experience. I've had a number of people come speak to me or send me notes or emails that something I said was a shared experience with something that they have also experienced. And that's meaningful to me. It was helpful to me, so I appreciated that feedback. It's comforting somehow to know that you're not alone. And of course, we're not alone. That is an overarching message of this program, is that God is with us. I want to invite Joyce to come forward. I'm going to hook her up to the microphone. And I also want to thank her for her bravery and her willingness to share this. I will acknowledge that my grief story was almost 15 years ago, and Joyce's is more recent than mine, and I think that makes it difficult. So I'm grateful to you for that. Thank you.
So I'm not quite as brave as she thinks I am. I'm going to say that.
You're not quite as tall as I am.
I know I'm not. Okay. All right, thank you. So, I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory before I begin talking about when my grief began. I grew up in a really very sheltered family life. If there was any trauma in my childhood, I certainly didn't recognize it. I don't even know that I knew what grief was. I had grandparents who passed away, but they weren't close to me, and so I never felt grief. I didn't really understand what it was, and so I was not prepared for what I had coming for me. I would love to tell you this. So Bob and I, my husband and I, met the year before we graduated from college. And I want to tell you this because I want you to know what a great relationship we had, and how that's a box of tissue that just floated across the. So thank you very much. So we met on a blind date in Williamsburg. Thank you. And he was going to school there. He had been 2 years in the service, and so he was finishing his 2 years in college. I was there in the summertime working. I wasn't really working, had the best job ever. I was in the Common Glory for 2 summers, and that's what I was doing there, singing in the choir. It was the most wonderful. So this was a blind date. I did not want to go because what I found out was he was a KA, and I knew that KAs were heavy with the drink, and I was not into that at all, and so I didn't want to go. He didn't want to go because he had the idea that anybody that's in theater is probably very loose, and so he didn't want to meet me either. But we went ahead because it was a favor to somebody who needed a car, and Bob had a car. So we met that night, and we talked for a long time and found out that neither one of us was right. It just goes to prove you cannot judge, don't prejudge somebody. So we never dated anyone else after that. We were married 2 years later and had 4 wonderful children, and still there was no trauma. There was, everything was just fine. So here's what I was unprepared for. When he started, this was probably, in fact, Nina, I think it might have been 2008, about that same year, when he started asking me questions, and I would answer him, and then a little while later he would ask me the same question, like I hadn't answered him. And I was a little annoyed because I thought he's just not paying attention, that's all. And so I really did ignore that pretty much. I just kept answering him and telling him he should pay attention. But it got more and more, and I began to realize that this was not just that he wasn't just paying attention. So it was the beginning of dementia for him. It lasted about 10 years, I guess. It got progressively worse, of course. He never, he knew who I was, but he didn't know who his grandchildren were, but he tried valiantly to pretend like he knew everybody. And so it was very hard to watch him trying to be his wonderful, sweet self and not knowing where he was. It got worse. He had the sundown syndrome, so that once it got dark, he was very confused. He always wanted to go home, even though we were home. So I began. That's when I realized that my world was not perfect. That it was that I was going to be grieving, and it was a very long. They say that's a long goodbye, and that was sort of the way it was. But so he went for. This was in May of 2016. He went for a physical. The doctor called me that afternoon and he said, you need to take him straight to the hospital. And it turned out that his kidneys were failing. And so he was in the hospital from Tuesday until Friday. We had made arrangements to take him home. The doctor said that it might be another week. And so we were going to take him home. I came home that afternoon, and my daughter was with him. And all this time, my children, and especially my daughters, of course, were rocks for me, absolute rocks. So I came home, and my youngest daughter was staying with him. I went back over there about 8 o'clock. She told me I could wait until 9, that she could stay, but I said, no, I'm on the way, so I will go. I went into the hospital room, and I could tell he didn't look like he knew where he was, or he didn't know where he was, in fact. But I walked over to him, and I said, honey, do you know who I am? And he said, no. And that's the first time that he didn't know me, and that just... But he died about 30 minutes later. If I had waited until 9 o'clock, I wouldn't have been there with him, but I was with him. And so that was a very long goodbye. It was so hard to lose him, but I realized that I had lost him even before that. He was not that same funny person. But so then, sort of, we recovered from that. And there's one thing about this is my personal feeling about this now. So he was not having a good life. He was not enjoying himself, and I knew that when he died, he was at peace, and that gave me some peace too, because he was no longer confused about where he was and who people were, and he thought my granddaughter was a boy that he didn't know, and that was just so now he knows who everybody is. There's that. So a year later, in August. So let me make sure I'm getting these. I was so worried about these dates. I thought I would know. Yeah, Bob died in August of 2016. So a year later, in August of 2017, I was in Scotland on the way home. And on the way home, I got sort of a message that my oldest daughter, Mary Beth, was in the hospital. What is that about? So I got home. They said, don't worry, she's going to be okay. She went into the hospital with a tumor on her colon, but they've operated and everything's going to be fine. So I went in to see her, and so when I walked into the hospital room, she looked up at me, my daughter with her 3 almost grown children. She said, "Mommy, I'm sick." Oh. And she was sick. So she went through a period of a year of chemo and radiation. And a year later, they declared that she was cancer-free. She no longer had cancer in her any of her soft tissues. So that was great. And she went to the awareness garden and rang the bell. And we were all so happy for her, because that same summer her son got married, and she was able to go to the wedding, and she looked wonderful, and her hair had grown back, and all was well. And then, not very long after that, she began having headaches, and so the cancer had come back, and it was all over her. And so for the next months, she was so brave. She was not afraid of dying. She knew she was going to die. She knew that she would not get well. But she was so brave, she made us all brave too, as brave as somebody can be. But I said to her one day, "Mary Beth, I honestly don't know how I can go on without you." She was the person that I would go to, that I could ask for. She'd like to come to me for advice, but actually I was going to her for advice most of the time. But she said, when I said, "I don't know how I'm going to be able to live without you," she says, "Well, Mom, you're going to have to." That was her comment. So I was with her when she died. Her husband was holding her hand, and I had my hand on her face when she took her last breath. And while I grieved for Bob, I think my grief for Mary Beth was the strongest, because she had so much to give still. And I didn't tell you this, she had a granddaughter that was born 6 weeks before she died. She wanted to be a grandparent so badly, but she did get to hold the baby. And so there was that. So soon after that, I decided I'm going to have to do something different, something that's totally out of my comfort zone to get my mind. I just need to be centered. And Pernell Pettichon teaches watercolor lessons, and I've known Pernell for a long time. And so I saw her one day, and just out of the blue, it just kind of popped up. I said, maybe I would like to take watercolor lessons. I've got to tell you, the only watercolor brush I had ever touched was like in elementary school with those little, you know, the little things about that long with those little colors, and I thought, yeah, how hard can this be, right? You can just take a brush. And so, I will do that. So once the pandemic was over, I started taking watercolor lessons from her. And I don't have an artistic talent. What I do it's just luck. When it turns out right, it's just luck. But it's so wonderful. Here's what's nice about it: you do it, and then it's done. You don't have to. It's not like housework or that other stuff that gets in the way. It's done. So I brought a couple of them with me to show you, so that you can appreciate the fact that I will never, I tease my children though. I say that I think that maybe the time, if they can wait long enough, it'll be like Grandma Moses. Good guess. Yes, I did bring a few. So this is one, I saw this picture in a book and I liked it so much. Wow. So it's two little children walking with their dog. They'll be up here if you want to look close, but honestly they look a lot better from far away. So yeah, so there's that one. And you know that I love Williamsburg, of course. And so this is one of the little baby lambs in Williamsburg that I did. And most all of these were done. I know this one was done maybe a year and a half ago or something like that. I had not been taking very long. And what do you have? Oh, this one. Yeah, this is the Big Dipper. I don't know if you can see. Stephen, welcome to you. Thank you, Nina.
I'm going to walk them around.
You're doing a good job. And then this one is Williamsburg. You may recognize that. And so, I brought those. I must have 50 of them at home because I was painting all the time for a long time, just from one thing to the other. And it's made. It really has. Let me say it once again. I am not an artist. It's just something that I just lucked into, and yeah. But it does turn out that I needed a lot more than those 8 colors that were in the watercolor. So yeah. And I do want to share with you one other thing the way that I cope with grief that doesn't have anything to do with watercolor, but it has everything to do with the Eucharist. So someone told me a long time ago, she said, you know, whenever I go to communion, are we okay?
Yeah.
Okay? Mm-hmm. She said, I think about I think about how when I'm having communion, I'm also communing with the people who've gone on before me. And so I used to think about that all the time. After my mom and dad died, that was whenever I had communion, I was thinking about them. So then there's we say with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven, we sing holy, holy, holy. And you may see me smile when we do this because Bob said when he was in elementary school, his teacher told him, just move your mouth, don't sing. And so he never would sing. He didn't sing. Mary Beth, bless her heart, could not carry a tune either. She just couldn't. And so now I know, though, that they are the company of heaven. And when I sing the holy, 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 I really imagine myself singing it with them. And they're in tune. So that's my story. And the waves of grief It's like Lena said, it doesn't just happen and then it goes away. It comes in waves, and sometimes when I least expect it. I was talking to my other daughter, my younger daughter, the other day about it, and she said, she was in the kitchen doing something, she said, and she said, I just started crying. I think about, I can see her, I can see Mary Beth walking in. She came every Sunday afternoon to see me and wore lug boots, and she would come swaggering in, and I see that all the time. But I am at peace with it. It's not that it keeps me from grieving, but the grief is, it comes and then it goes, because and then I try to remind myself how fortunate, I know this, I must say it anyway, how fortunate I was to have had them in my life at all. That I might have gone through my whole life and never met Bob, almost didn't meet him, and almost, as a matter of fact, Mary Beth, when she's a baby, had a hard time the first couple of days. So but I did have them. So that's it. I do have a prayer. May I?
Please.
Okay. O merciful Father, who has taught us in thy holy word that thou dost not willingly afflict or grieve the children of men, look with pity upon the sorrows of thy servants for whom our prayers are offered. Remember us, O Lord, in mercy. Nourish our souls with patience. Comfort us with a sense of thy goodness. Lift up thy countenance upon us and give us your peace. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.